Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Office of Personnel Management plans to take a more hands-off approach to the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. A new proposal would make agencies, rather than OPM, responsible for surveying their own employees. OPM is also seeking to cut some currently required questions and add back in some different ones. Here with more, Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, welcome back.
Eric, nice to be with you today.
Well, happy to have you. So for some context, what has OPM's role historically been when it's passing out the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey and conducting this important questionnaire that really gives a snapshot of employee engagement?
Absolutely. And thanks for kind of giving an overview, too, of what the FEVS really does here. But for OPM's purposes, they've been administering this government-wide survey since about 2004. So for more than 20 years, each year, they are managing and distributing the survey across agencies. Now, most agencies will rely on FEVS to fulfill what are actually statutorily required surveys of their employees. So under federal statute, since 2004, agencies have been required to ask questions about leadership, employee satisfaction, the work environment, opportunities for professional development, et cetera, et cetera. And while that's required under statute, it's not OPM's requirement necessarily to be in charge of that survey, but it has been in charge of it to essentially make things easier for agencies over time. So that's really where we are today, except for, of course, in 2025, when we had a bit of an outlier year because the FEVS was not conducted at all.
All right. And so what is OPM looking to do to change the way the survey is distributed to federal employees?
So going forward, starting for 2026 and this survey cycle, agencies would be responsible for surveying their own employees rather than having OPM distribute the FEVS government-wide. So these would still require agencies to include a set of core and standardized questions that all are required to include on their surveys. But then OPM is saying in this new proposal that they can include additional questions that are more agency-specific if they'd like to. Then the idea from there, once agencies are surveying their own employees, get those results back, then they would have to report their findings and the responses that they got from employees back to OPM, as well as the Office of Management and Budget, so that they can do some sort of government-wide analysis akin to what we've seen in past years through FEVS. But they're generally seeming to be sort of distributing the wealth here, for lack of a better term, and having agencies do these surveys themselves rather than OPM, again, managing it government-wide, as has been the case for more than 20 years.
Talking here with Federal News Network reporter Drew Friedman. So for the questions themselves and what's contained in the actual survey, how would the FEVS questions be changed in this new proposal from OPM?
There are going to be a good number of changes to the actual questions asked, and a lot of it we still don't know because we only know what are going to be these core questions that are asked government-wide, and we don't necessarily know what agencies are going to ask individually. But if you look back to the federal statute that requires agencies to survey their employees each year, there are currently 16 questions that all agencies must ask. And these look at things, again, like leadership, satisfaction, whether you feel like you have opportunities to advance your career, whether you feel like you understand how your job matches to your agency's mission. But now what OPM is trying to do with the new proposal is bring that number 16 down to just 10 questions, and also make a good number of revisions to what agencies are actually going to be required to ask. So they're taking out, for instance, questions about employee satisfaction and about whether they would recommend their organization as a good place to work. But then on the tail end, or the other end of things, add in questions asking employees about poor performers, for example. So a good number of changes, not only to the distribution of the survey here, but also to what is going to be on the survey as well.
Yeah, exactly. What happened in 2025? What wasn't there a FEVS?
That was definitely an outlier year for the FEVS. It's the first time since the survey began in 2004 that OPM simply chose not to conduct the survey at all. There have been times where maybe it's been postponed for a couple of months, but last year was the first time ever that OPM just chose not to conduct FEVS at all. The reasoning for that is not entirely clear, but they promised to bring back FEVs with a good number of changes this year, which seems to be the case given this new proposed regulation from OPM. And also OPM Director Scott Cooper talked earlier this year about plans to bring back the survey, but then that noted that it would, for example, be slimmer and shorter and focus on what he called micro-level questions. So that might have been an allusion to the focus now being on agencies conducting their own survey. But yes, even going forward and having the FEVs for 2026, there is going to be a notable data gap without just having that survey last year at all.
Let's talk timeline for this year. When might we see the FEVs coming out, and when will employees be expected to answer them?
Not entirely clear yet. All I got from OPM was them saying that it would just be done by the end of the calendar year. But given that under this proposal, at least, agencies are required to conduct their own surveys, I'd imagine there might be slightly different timing for different agencies and depending on on where an employee works. And in the meantime, in the short term, OPM is also asking for public comments on the proposal to change both the distribution and the survey content. That's open for the next roughly 2 months for people to comment on. But I think we'll see more on this to come in just the next couple of months here.
All right, we'll have you back then. Federal News Network's Drew Friedman providing us an update on the upcoming FEVs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric.
And you can find more of Drew's reporting on this at federalnewsnetwork.com.
Sean O'Keefe, former Navy Secretary, NASA Administrator, and senior leader across multiple presidential administrations, reflects on the principles that shaped his long federal career. In this episode of Lessons in Leadership, he joined Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, to discuss motivating teams through uncertainty, leading across agencies, and staying rooted in mission during times of public scrutiny and change.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Sean O'Keefe, former NASA Administrator, former Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, former Secretary of the Navy, former Comptroller and CFO of the Defense Department, and Professor Emeritus at Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Public Affairs. Welcome, and thank you for joining.
Well, thank you, Shane. Delight to be with you. Appreciate it very much.
What first drew you into public service, and when was it evident to you that leadership was an important part of the roles you played?
Well, I grew up around the public service. My dad was a career naval officer. He was a submariner, and we lived all over the place. Throughout the country. And as a result, I got an up close and personal understanding through him, as well as through all the folks he associated with and the environments he was working in, just what the extraordinary value is of public service and what is it that would motivate people to want to be engaged in it and to be really involving themselves in what is something larger than themselves. And the only place that is really, formulated properly is within the public sector and the public service. That again is the beneficiary or the beneficiaries are the citizens of the nation, the community, and the region in which you live.
Did you think about leadership early on, saying I need to be a great leader, and therefore I'm going to learn how to do it, or did you just naturally evolve into it? Any thoughts on that?
I guess it evolved by the great good fortune of being witness to several really extraordinary leaders, people who really did take the initiative to engage others in the task, to pull together and motivate folks to really contribute their very best to achieve an outcome. And I saw the value of that on multiple occasions, and found that was the primary ingredient, the trait, the characteristic that needed to be exhibited is the fundamentals of leadership in moving everyone engaged towards a common objective.
You have served under several presidents. Can you talk a little bit about that? What were there challenges to overcome, or were you away from politics so you didn't get Talk about that a little bit. How does it differ as you serve through a transition, or does leadership stay the same?
Oh no, it's it's really critically important in transition cases, to be sure. But the two presidents that I served in their administrations were President George H.W. Bush and President George W. Bush in two different eras, obviously. But as a consequence, that was the closest I came to understanding the nature of the individuals who were in that ultimate leadership capacity, and their capability to motivate. Both of them were just extraordinarily inspiring people who motivated everybody to be part of the solution. But most importantly, they also had a capacity of really designating what needed to be done. And you knew that they were perfectly prepared to do it themselves. And that made the task that much more achievable. There were several different circumstances in understanding what the objectives of the senior leadership are all about.
You've worked for different kinds of organizations, political administrations, and then government departments, agencies, and then private sector, and now academia. How does that affect your leadership style? Or do you find that leadership, the core tenets of leadership, are applicable no matter what the organization you find yourself in and having to lead? It doesn't matter where you are, that the core leadership characteristics are the same? Are they different? Are you adapting?
Well, there's a common myth in my judgment, and I'm probably the minority view of this in the academic field of public management. That common myth is that you can't apply the same principles in the public sector that you do in the private sector.
Yeah.
I never found that to be an impediment.
Okay.
It was always a circumstance where, strategy, the focus on the talent, people engaged, the process to going through decision making, the integrity imperative that must be there in order to demonstrate the absolute conviction of what's intended here, as well as the moral standing of what it is you're attempting to achieve. All those factors are very much the same. It's going to have its nuances, and there are very distinctive, differentiators within those organizations and those sectors. But at the same time, those basic principles, those tenets, foundations of what make up organizations and organization theory, in so many ways are fundamentally the same. And how you employ those may be slightly nuanced to match the condition, but they all are imperative in the same direction.
A little bit of a different direction. You were part of the very first cohort of what is now Presidential Management Intern Program, later became the Presidential Management Fellows Program. What did that early experience teach you about leading within government?
The Presidential Management Intern Program, as it started, was designed for just that purpose, a focus on public management, a focus on implementation. And its evolution over time has been extraordinary. It mystifies me why that has been the subject now of an executive order that has dismantled it. And it's absolutely unconscionable given the nature of the hundreds, thousands of people who've moved through that program in the course of the last nearly 50 years that have gone on in some cases to be senior executives within the federal government, and in other cases they've moved on to other kinds of pursuits. But even with that, even for those who have left the service, they walked away with an appreciation of what public service is all about, why it matters, and why this is so critical to get it right. Because by and large, the reason why these functions are delegated to the public sector is because no one else can do it. Usually that's the case. It takes that kind of focus of a public entity in order to achieve an outcome that frankly would not be achieved in other spheres. So as a result of that, it gave me an incredibly in-depth understanding of that process at a very early stage in my career that has lasted the entirety of that professional experience.
A closing question: who has influenced your leadership style, and what about their example stays with you? And that question can be cast broadly. So, inside government, outside government, perhaps not government at all. Somebody that you've met, reported to, been mentored by, a broad net. But when you think about broadly, when you think about who has influenced you, who comes to mind?
I would have to say that the number one, hands down, greatest influence during the course of my life was my dad. He was an engineer, so everything was a calculated risk. I think I was probably 25 before I realized the answer was not to be found for everything in a slide rule, but that was his bent and his mindset. And he taught me how to think critically. And it really was one of the most extraordinary attributes. And he was an inspiring parent and mentor in so many ways. And all the different things I've done throughout the course of his life, I had the opportunity through much of it to be able to consult with him on a variety of things, and always walked away with a more informed perspective. Dad was an extraordinary public servant in his own right.
Well, Sean, thank you very much for sharing your insights and experiences. It has been a pleasure talking.
I'm delighted to be with you, Shane. Thank you so much for doing this.
And this is Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, reminding you to empower your team and embrace challenges. Until the next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.